Welcome to Crime Scene Sunday, aka Forensic Friday on a Sunday, where I tell you one true crime case that was solved using forensic science, all while doing, that's right, my makeup. Today's video will be featuring the Limoncello palette from Colourpop. All the other products I'm using in this video will be linked in the description below. Please read the disclaimer. I am not a professional forensic pathologist, nor am I a professional makeup artist. I'm just the average girl at home like you, planning my makeup while I talk about a true crime case. So if that's something you're into, then you're more than welcome to stick around and hit the subscribe button. Also, quick reminder, the comment section is a privilege. Don't fuck it up. Now let's get into today's case. LA is having a major rainstorm for like the last 3 days, so you guys are gonna have to just bear through it. Hopefully you guys find it relaxing, because ain't nothing I can do about it. Is what the universe wants, is what the universe wants. This all takes place in 1997 in Buffalo, New York, where Dr. Anthony Pignataro lived with his beautiful wife and 2 young children. He had a little boy and a little girl. Dr. Pignataro was at the peak of his career as a plastic surgeon. He was very well respected in his community. He also was an entrepreneur, and he invented something called the snap-on toupee. Guys, I gotta show you guys a picture of this ish because it's just the funniest thing ever. Now, the snap-on toupee was a toupee that was held in place by drilling 4 large bolts into the skull, and then you could just snap on the toupee or snap it off. I mean, I don't know what to think about that. Dr. Pignataro was very passionate about his inventions. In fact, he actually wore his snap-on toupees throughout his daily life, and some of his friends thought it was a funny invention and they kind of laughed about it and joked about it, but he was pretty serious about it. Now, Dr. Pignataro's wife, Debbie, she said that from the moment she met him, she knew that he was just different. He always had these wild, insane ideas that oftentimes worked. So when she heard about the snap-on toupee, she thought that it was funny, but she also knew it was something that he was very passionate about and something that he was probably going to make happen. Life for the Pignataros at this time was perfect, was picture perfect, you could say. Everything that Anthony had worked so hard for when he was younger to become a surgeon was all falling into place. He had his own private practice that everyone knew about, and he was super popular. One day in the fall of 1997, Dr. Pignataro headed out to his office to perform surgery on one of his patients. This patient was 26-year-old mother of 2, Sarah Smith, and she was coming into his office because she wanted to get a breast augmentation done. Now, the particular surgery that Sarah was looking to get was a very invasive surgery. It was a umbilical, I can't remember the name. Lord help me if I butcher it. I drink Red Bull and now my brain is like going 1,000 miles per hour. It's going faster than I can speak. And my brain already naturally goes that fast, and that's why it's hard for me to keep up with language. It's on a rampage. Anyway, so Sarah came in to get this breast augmentation done. At the time, there was no anesthesiologist present. There was only Dr. Pignataro's wife, who was assisting him, and a registered practical nurse. Now, during the operation, Sarah begins to feel pain. I'm not a surgeon, but I know that you shouldn't be feeling pain during surgery. And I know what you guys are probably thinking, why the heck was she not put to sleep? So anyway, he was trying to perform this really invasive surgery without even having the proper anesthetic. So Sarah is starting to feel pain, and she tells the doctor that she's starting to feel things. Dr. Pignataro orders the nurse to administer the drug sodium pentothal. It's a general anesthetic that is meant to help dull Sarah's pain, but not soon after receiving the anesthetic, something went horribly wrong. Sarah began to lose oxygen and her system started shutting down. Panicked, Dr. Pignataro and his team, which consisted of his wife and a practical registered nurse, all started to frantically try to resuscitate Sarah. They were calling her name, slapping her face, trying to get her to wake up. So everybody is panicking as Dr. Pigmentaro is trying to save Sarah's life, but it was too late and she died on the table. The paramedics were called out, and upon arrival, they found Sarah Smith's lifeless body laying on the doctor's operating table. It appeared as though she had overdosed on too much anesthetic. But how had this happened? When investigators arrived, they questioned Dr. Pigmentaro and his staff and learned that there was no anesthesiologist monitoring the patient. There was also no ventilator to help Sarah breathe, which is absolutely insane to me. Like, that's absolutely unacceptable. How do you even have a practice where you perform major plastic surgery on people like that, where you do not have a ventilator for your patients to breathe on? I'm just confused. Somebody tell me what's going on here. And when investigators learned that the only people on Dr. Pigmentaro's staff that day was his wife, who had no medical training or degrees or certificates whatsoever, and a practical registered nurse, they knew that this was not good. Because of all of this, state prosecutors opened an investigation into Dr. Pigmentaro and his practice. Investigators learned that not only was Dr. Pigmentaro not a board-certified plastic surgeon, but he wasn't even a plastic surgeon at all. That is alarming. So who is this guy? Like, seriously. He hadn't finished his course to become an ears, nose, and throat doctor. I mean, he knew all of the techniques and he knew how to do it. Well, at least we assumed that he did. He had taken the course, but he hadn't finished his courses and passed to get the certificates that he needed to be a certified surgeon. Imagine you go to the dentist and he's not an actual dentist. Like, he's performing these major operations on your teeth and he's not even a dentist. I mean, it's already scary enough to have to go to one of these guys, let alone them not actually be certified or licensed in what they're doing. That's like, that. I feel like that's the ultimate nightmare. Medical examiners performed an autopsy on Sarah and found that she would have survived had Dr. Pigmentaro had the proper resuscitation equipment. I mean, that's sad. This is definitely negligent. Obviously, Dr. Pigmentaro was ill-equipped to handle a procedure such as this. Dr. Pigmentaro was charged with involuntary manslaughter. To avoid a trial, Anthony Pigmentaro pled guilty to criminal negligent homicide. He was sentenced to 6 months in prison and a $5,000 fine. He also had to serve 250 hours of community service. His medical license was also revoked. Things for the Pigmentaro family were not going well, and Anthony went from the highlight peak of his career to rock bottom real quick. After Anthony served his sentence and was released from prison, things did not get any better for the Pigmentaro family. He returned to his home but was unable to work to support his family because of, you know, everything had happened. His parole also prevented him from leaving the area, so he couldn't like move and find a better job or go to a place where nobody knew who he was. He was basically stuck in this community where everybody knew who he was and what he had done. It was hard and nobody wanted to hire this guy, okay? And I understand why. Definitely not in his field of expertise. I mean, I'm sure he could have got a job in the grocery store, but I mean, with all of those degrees and all of that hard work that he had put in, oh my God, there's a cat here. I can feel it on my chin. Who would want to waste their life working in a grocery store when you work so hard and paid so much to go to school, to become a doctor? It's just sad. It's really sad to make a mistake like that. Actions have consequences, like I always tell you guys. He lost the respect of everyone in the community. No one wanted to hire him or work with him anymore. And he began receiving death threats, he said. The Pigmentaro's home began to get vandalized. They didn't know who was doing it, but somebody spray painted "killer" in the large letters on the side of their house. With all of that education that Dr. Pigmentaro had, he didn't have the common sense to have a ventilator for his patients to breathe on. Because Dr. Pimentaro wasn't making any money and the family were unable to keep up with their bills, this took a real toll on the Pimentaro family, especially Anthony's relationship with his wife, Debbie. They started to fight more frequently. Debbie ended up separating for Anthony and leaving him because she just couldn't deal. She couldn't hang in there. After this, Anthony falls into this great depression. I mean, who wouldn't? Anthony's entire life had been ruined by his poor decisions and this event. He no longer had his wife. He didn't have his kids. He didn't have his job. He didn't have any money. It was the worst time in his life. Now, although all of this, Lucy is here. Lucy has joined us. Say hi, detective. Hello. Hello. Now, things were so bad that Anthony's mother started to support him. And eventually he was able to reconcile with Debbie and get her to come back to him. With the support of Anthony's mother, the family was able to come back together while his mother supported them financially. Anthony really wanted to rebuild his life and get his reputation back as a plastic surgeon, as a doctor, but it was proving to be a lot difficult than he thought. Although they were still going through a difficult time financially, at least he had his family back and things seemed to be getting better until Anthony's wife, Debbie, fell ill. Did that rhyme again? Oh my gosh. Guys, I do it to myself. It was shortly after she had reconciled with Anthony. Initially, they thought that it was just a regular cold, but when she couldn't kick it, they knew something was really wrong. It had been months at this point, and it was time for Debbie to go see a doctor. She was nauseous and vomiting, and her legs and hands would go numb. It got to the point where she was unable to lift her legs and even walk. Neither her regular doctor nor Anthony could figure out what was going on with her. I mean, I wouldn't be taking Anthony's opinion. And she was getting worse. With her health rapidly declining, Debbie went to several other doctors to get a second opinion. The first doctor diagnosed her with myelodysplastic state. I am not sure how you pronounce that, okay? One of you medical professionals can put it in the comments to help everybody else. Her neurologist, however, diagnosed her with possible Guillain-Barré. I don't know what none of these things are, guys. Then her gastroenterologist diagnosed her with pancreatitis. I mean, all of these different things. But what was really going on? I mean, these are multiple different things that really have nothing to do with each other. It just didn't make sense, and medical professionals were finding it difficult to piece it all together where it would make sense. It was just very puzzling to them. Anthony made a suggestion to the medical professionals that perhaps Debbie's illness was coming from her gallbladder that should have been removed. He urged the doctors to surgically remove her gallbladder. Debbie's pain persisted off and on. However, her doctors were too afraid to put her through surgery because of her weak state. So they decided that they didn't want to do it because Debbie was too weak and they weren't sure if she was going to survive the surgery. In fact, they believed that the surgery would have been fatal if they tried to do that on her. They were like, homeboy, we not doing that. We don't know how you roll and how you play because we seen you. We seen what you did. But that's not how it's going to go over here in our office, which, you know, you gotta respect them for that. The weird thing was, not long after Debbie started to feel ill, her daughter Lauren also started to feel sick. And although she was experiencing the same symptoms as Debbie, they weren't as harsh. Debbie's symptoms, however, got so bad that she now had to use a wheelchair to get around. She also started to experience really bad memory loss and had no signs of improvement. I don't know how my eyebrows are gonna do today. Are you guys gonna fuck with me today? I'm talking to my eyebrows. Debbie had been in and out of the hospital till finally she got so sick that they had to just admit her into the hospital. It wasn't until her doctor decided to take a sample of her bone marrow. Now, he decided to take a sample of her bone marrow and to look at it underneath a microscope to see if he could see anything weird. When the medical examiner looked underneath the microscope at the sample, that is when he made a startling discovery. Debbie's red blood cells had been degenerating. According to medical professionals, this is a condition known as ketiorexis. This, along with other symptoms that Debbie was experiencing, led medical professionals to conclude that Debbie's illness was the result of arsenic poisoning. They were stunned. How did Debbie get the arsenic poisoning in her system in the first place? Arsenic is relatively hard to come by. It is a heavy metal poison, and Debbie had an extremely high arsenic level in her system of 29,580 micrograms. That's equal to about a liter of arsenic poisoning. It was said to be one of the highest levels ever in a person. The Pigmentaro children were also tested. While they did find some in the daughter Lauren's system, they didn't find any in their son's system, and there was none in Anthony's system either. So it was just Debbie and her daughter Lauren who seemed to have come in contact with this arsenic poisoning. At this point, police got involved because it was obvious that this was not an accident, that someone had been intentionally poisoning Debbie. Now, they weren't sure who, so Debbie was admitted into the hospital and put under 24-hour security protection. Now it's time to go into the palette. But anyway, back to the story. Investigators began to look into the water source near the Pigmentaro's family home because they were thinking, could the water be contaminated with arson and maybe that's how they got poisoned? They had to explore all the options because it just really wasn't making sense at the time. I haven't done a neutral eye look in a really long time, so I want to do a kind of neutrally eye look today. For all of my natural girls out there, perhaps there was something in the water that they were drinking. So investigators collected samples of the water and sent it over to the forensics lab for testing. But the results came back and there was no contamination found in the water. Investigators started to theorize that perhaps Debbie was doing this to herself. The Pigmentaro family had been going through a difficult time financially. For obvious reasons, this pissed Debbie off. It was one thing to insinuate that she had poisoned herself, but to insinuate that she would try to kill her own children, that was completely out of line. In fact, she said in her interview, like, if she wanted to kill herself, she definitely wouldn't have poisoned herself in that way because that was a slow, agonizing way to die. No one would want to go that way. The Pigmentaros were getting really fed up with the police and they weren't getting any answers. So at this point, Tony suggested that perhaps Sarah Smith's family had something to do with the poisoning. Basically, he suspected that Sarah Smith's husband, Dan Smith, was doing this to get back at him for what had happened to Sarah. And he urged detectives to look into Dan. If you throw in the fact that the Pigmentaro family was receiving death threats and getting their home vandalized and all of these messages were being left, then it would make sense that Sarah Smith's family might be behind it and want to do something to get back at Anthony for what he had done. Investigators searched the Pigmentaro home and they found nothing. No traces of arsenic poison anywhere. She told them that she had a bowl of leftover soup that she found on the stove. And guess who made the soup that day? Anthony. Instantly, Debbie remembered that Anthony was the one who cooked the soup that day. According to her, he brought the soup to her in bed, and it was so much soup, she told him that she wouldn't be able to eat all of it because she wasn't feeling well, and he encouraged her to finish the soup, saying, "It's good for you." Anthony, what you doing? Investigators needed to figure out when exactly Debbie and Lauren got poisoned. So they took a sample of their hair and sent it to the lab for testing. According to medical experts, when arsenic is ingested, it binds to one of the major proteins in the hair, keratin, and it stays there as the hair grows out. Using an average estimate of how much hair grows per month, about 1 centimeter, investigators could come to a reasonable time frame of when Debbie had been poisoned. First, Debbie's hair was cut into pieces about 1 centimeter long. They converted the pieces from solid hair samples into liquid hair samples using acid and a specially designed microwave oven to digest it. This technique is called atomic absorption spectrophotometry. The results of the test came back and it showed that Debbie had began being poisoned in May of 1999, all the way up until the end of July 1999. And it also showed that her doses had been increased over time. It started with smaller doses and then increased its way up. Her highest dose was at the end of July. She had received 80 times the lethal amount. One thing is for sure, whoever was doing this was not playing around at all. This timeline eliminated Sarah Smith's husband, Dan, as a suspect because the family had actually moved away during that time. They were in a different state. This left only one other possible suspect, Debbie's husband, Anthony. He had opportunity, but what was his motive? Investigators needed to do a little more digging to find out. Detectives focused their attentions on Anthony, and he became their prime suspect in the case. He would have been the first one on my list, up on my radar. I'm surprised they didn't even think of that first. Now, in March of 1999, when Anthony and Debbie separated and Debbie was living in a different residence, she hadn't been having those symptoms. There was no arsenic in her system. But by May of 1999, the couple had gotten back together. Ironically, this is when Debbie started to experience these symptoms. Ooh, that's yellow. I didn't expect that to be yellow. I thought that would be, I mean, I know it's called the Limoncello palette, but this looks pretty brown. Ugh. I use this color right here. Is that yellow to you guys? Investigators went back to speak with Debbie's daughter, Lauren, because she was home that day. When detectives questioned Lauren about the day she got sick, she told police that her father was setting up traps around the house all day. When they asked her to describe what the traps looked like, she said that she wasn't really sure what the traps were, but that they came in these little round tin cans. Oh, shit. Sounds like he's poisoning this lady with roach poisoning. Using her description and with further investigation, they found out that there was only one manufacturing company that made insect repellent that used those small round tins. They spoke with the manufacturing manager, and the manufacturing manager confirmed that they did in fact use arsenic poisoning in their insect repellent. Oh my God, this man. First it was the snap-on toupee. Now he's killing people with insect repellent. I mean, at least I guess you could say at least he's creative. They took a sample of the repellent from the manufacturing company, sent it to the forensics lab for testing, and in fact it came back positive for arsenic poisoning. It's adding up, y'all. It's adding up. Debbie couldn't believe it. Her own husband was trying to murder her. And for what reason? Still, what was the motive? Investigators did a little more digging on Anthony's past, and they found out that while Anthony was in prison, he befriended some ex-cons and he actually got involved in drugs, and he became very addicted to heroin. I don't even know if I could say that on here because YouTube is like, they're trying to censor us, y'all. They're trying to shut our mouths. Now, this ex-con had access to drugs, and when he got out of prison, he did stay in contact with this same ex-con who continued to supply him with the drugs. They also found out that Anthony started having an affair with a woman shortly after he had gotten out of prison. All of this was happening right underneath Debbie's nose. Friends of Anthony's later revealed that he didn't want to get a divorce because he feared his mother's reaction. She was fully financially supporting him at the time, and she was very much against divorce. That meant that she most likely would have stopped supporting him and he would have been cut out of her will. He could not have that. If you think about it, if this all worked according to plan, he would have gotten rid of Debbie, so he'd have been able to be with the woman that he wanted to be with. He would have no longer had to hide his drug problem. Also, he most likely would have got some money from Debbie's death. In addition to that, he would have kept his inheritance with his mom, and she would have continued to support him and his children. Sounds like homeboy had it all figured out. But then, during a search of the home, investigators discovered another possible motive. They found a manuscript written by Anthony entitled MD Mass Destruction. Pick him up. It's time to get him. I don't even know if I want to know what that story was about. The story was all about Anthony's life and everything that had taken place with Sarah Smith, how he was unfairly treated by the judicial system and by the medical community. He felt like they betrayed him. Prosecutors believe that Anthony did all this as a stunt to have Debbie die on the operating table so that he could prove a point about Sarah Smith. To make a point that sometimes people do die in surgery, as Sarah Smith had. This would explain why he tried to convince Debbie's doctors to perform such a life-threatening surgery on her, like removing her gallbladder while she was in such a critical state. Finally, they had their guy, and they believe that this was his motive. There was just one thing that investigators were still curious about, and that is how Debbie managed to survive such a massive amount of arsenic. Well, according to medical experts, because he began giving her smaller doses of the poisoning, it built up her tolerance over time. So by the time he increased her dosages, it just didn't have the same effect on her. What a dum-dum. I mean, he's the damn doctor, and he doesn't know this. They started to believe that he was also the one behind the threatening messages that the family was receiving, and he probably was the one to vandalize his own home just to make it seem realistic. During interrogation, investigators presented Anthony with the scientific evidence, and he didn't deny it. He just said that he could understand how some people could think that. Thanks to forensic science and some good police work, Anthony Pignataro pled guilty to attempted first-degree murder and assault and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Till this day, Debbie still suffers from side effects from the arsenic poisoning. What did you guys think about this case and my makeup look? Please let me know in the comments down below. If you like videos like these, you can check out some of my other videos. I'll leave them linked on the screen right here. Like, comment, subscribe, and share. Please share because it really helps me out. And I'll see you guys next time with another true crime story time. Bye! I wanna see some cash. I wanna see some cash. Oops. Thumbnail time.